Hey, welcome back to the Southern Catholic. I'm Jesse Jones, and thank you for joining me. Today, I wanted to start with the church in the New Testament, with church ecclesiology, but being that it's the Friday after Ash Wednesday and we're in the season of Lent, and today is the memorial of two of my favorite saints, Saints Perpetua and Felicity, I thought that it was only appropriate that I talk about them today. These two saints have a profound place in my heart because their story is just so amazing. It's one of those stories that is beautiful, sad, and triumphant all simultaneously. And it really plays on a lot of emotions at the same time. And Lent is a season that we are called to give a special. We're called to give special attention to the things that separate us from Christ. We're called to serve penance, but we're also called to start looking at things that we can cut out of our life that interfere with our relationship with Christ. And so, in a sense, during Lent, we're dying to ourselves so that we can rise again with Christ at Easter. And of course, these things that we are limiting during Lent shouldn't be things that we just limit during Lent. We should also look at limiting them throughout life. But especially during Lent, it's a time for us to focus on cutting out the fat, so to speak. And the lives of the martyrs. Now, if you don't know what a martyr is someone who gives a witness for something. But in the Christian sense, a martyr is someone who gives their life as a witness for the faith. They actually proclaim the gospel by laying down their lives for the faith. So by modeling our lives after the martyrs, we become better Christians. We have a hard enough time living for Christ. Most of us just choose not to, actually. And I include myself in that whenever I say that. We live in a time where people actually expect for the church to change her teachings rather than them changing their lives and conforming their lives to the will of God. They want it the other way around. But the martyrs remind us that's not what it's about. That's not how it works. We are called to, if we're going to be Christ's disciple, we are called to lay down our cross and follow, not lay down our cross. We are called to pick up our cross and follow him. We lay down our lives by picking up our cross and following him. We are called to die to ourselves daily and rise anew in Christ. And so I wanted to share the story of these two martyrs so we can meditate on that and hopefully be better Christians because of it. Perpetua was a noble woman. She was probably 22 years old. And Felicity was her servant. They both share the Christian faith, though. Perpetua was a matron, but her husband isn't mentioned, and we don't know why. It could be because he had left, or it could be because he himself was martyred for the faith already. We don't know. Her father was pagan, and she had a brother who was also a catechumen at the time. So Perpetua, her brother, Felicity, and others with them were arrested, and at some point they received baptism before they were imprisoned. And the Perpetua was actually nursing an infant at the time. At some point during her prison sentence, the child was weaned, but Felicity was pregnant at the time. At the time, Rome would not execute a pregnant woman. And Ascension, which is a Catholic app, they said on the app, they had it wrong. It said that she had prayed not to have her child before the date of martyrdom. It's the exact opposite. She prayed to be delivered so that she could suffer martyrdom. So Felicity gave birth in the 8th month to a little girl who was then given to some members in the community of believers there in Carthage. This is happening in Carthage, okay, in Africa, if you don't know. And Perpetua had a reputation as being a visionary. She had charismatic gifts, and I think that's very interesting because sometimes in the Catholic faith we neglect to talk about the charismatic gifts, but there are charismatic gifts in the faith. And she was known for having visions. And while they're in prison, her brother asked, you receive revelations from God. Ask him, if this is supposed to be a passion, meaning we're going to die for the faith, or if there's going to be an escape from this. And so she prays on it, and she ends up getting an answer, and the answer is that it's a passion. She has a vision where there's a ladder going up to heaven, and at the bottom of the ladder there's a dragon, and along the ladder are these weapons designed to torture their flesh on the way up the ladder. So first they got to conquer the dragon, the devil, who's going to try to prevent them from actually going through this process of martyrdom. And then they have to go through the torturous process of being martyred. And then finally they get to the top of the ladder into heaven, where Christ is at the top of the ladder with the host. Now, if you're not Catholic, the host is the bread that is consecrated and becomes the body and blood of Christ that Catholics partake of in what's called the Holy Eucharist. Protestants call it communion. They didn't receive Eucharist. They didn't receive the Eucharist on this side of death. They were baptized, and they had the agape meal at some point in their prison sentence, while they were in prison, but they didn't receive the Eucharist. It's important to note that her father, being a pagan, begged Perpetua to deny her faith. All she had to do was deny the faith, and she could have been spared this martyrdom, but she would not do it. She would not deny the faith. She asked her father, can you call a pot anything other than a pot? And he said, no. And she said, well, neither can I be called anything other than a Christian. I'm a Christian. I can't be anything else. That is so profound, because the Father represents so many of us today. So many of us, we will do anything to escape suffering. We will do anything to escape death, so to speak. And yet, you've got these two women. They're mothers who entrust their children, to other people and to God ultimately, to lay down their lives and give the ultimate witness for Christ. And if you're a parent and you have that bond, or if you can imagine what that bond is like, you know what that means. And that is profound. We can't even give up TikTok videos or, filming ourselves on Instagram or whatever. I mean, yeah, you've got these women giving up motherhood to live for Christ. It blows my mind. It's beyond words. It's one thing whenever you read the story of a martyr and it's like a single person and they give up their lives and there's no children for them to have to care for. But when you've got that responsibility of caring for a child and you lay down your life knowing that your child is left with someone else and your child won't know you except for what other people tell your child about you, that is just a whole other level of sacrifice, in my opinion. That's why whenever I first read this story, it just brought tears to my eyes. I just couldn't imagine being in that position and being able to do that. I would hope that I would have the ability to do that, but man, like I said, we live in a different age now. We don't even want to live in accord with the church's teachings on, artificial contraception, let alone, making that kind of a sacrifice. That's the age we live in, where people, we want the church to accommodate us rather than us conforming our lives to the gospel. So being that she was a visionary, she had two other visions, but I don't really want to talk about them right now because one of them is going to be relatable whenever we get to purgatory. So I don't really want to talk about that right now. But whenever I was meditating on the gospel reading a gospel reading this morning, I was in the book of Matthew meditating on the parable of the master who gives the tenants of silver to his servants. He's got 3 servants, and he gives 5 tenants to one servant, 2 tenants to another servant, and 1 tenant to a third servant. Well, the one who received the 5 tenants, he goes and invests it and receives a return of 5 tenants. So he's got 10 tenants of silver. The one whom he gave 2 tenants of silver to, he invests those tenants and he receives 2 in return. So he's got 4 tenants. The one whom he gave 1 to, he's terrified of the master and goes and buries the silver. And then whenever the master returns, he wants to know what they've done with his property. And so the one whom he gave 5 to, he's now got 10. And he says, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. Now you will enjoy the fullness of the reward." And so he enjoys the goods with his master. And so too with the second one. And then he gets to the third one, and the third one says, "Well, I know you're a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow, so I buried it, and well, here it is, I got it." And of course he says, "You lazy servant, how dare you? You know that I'm a harsh man, sowing where I did not reap." So he commands the guards to take his tenant from him and give it to the one who has the 10, and bind him up and throw him into the dungeon where there is wailing and gnashing of teeth. And it goes on to say that to the one who has much, more will be given, and to the one who has little, what he has will be taken away. That parable has always struck me as odd, and I've always had a hard time understanding it. It seems almost harsh, but when I was contemplating on the lives of these 2 saints and their companions, and whenever I was meditating on the words of St. Augustine, my patron saint, regarding free will and grace, Augustine says that the faith we have is not our own. It is given to us by God. We are justified gratuitously by faith. When something is gratuitous, that means it's a gift. We didn't work for it. It's not something we own. God gave it to us. Likewise, our works, because we can do no good work apart from God and without God's grace, the works are God's too. And the merit that we receive, and if you don't know what merit is a reward given for an action. The merits that we receive aren't even our own, because the merit is based off of the work that isn't ours. However, we say that the work is ours and that the merit is ours and that they are attributed to us because we do them with God. But it's by God that we do them. And as I thought on that, and I thought about the property that the servants had, it wasn't their property, it was the master's property. So they took the master's property, and if we look at it as being faith, they took the faith and they invested the faith. So if we were to use faith as an analogy, we invest that faith by doing works of charity and by proselytizing or witnessing for the faith. When we do that, we get a return on that. And that's how we end up enjoying the full rewards with the master. But if, having been given the faith, we hold it and hoard it and don't let anyone else know about it, we don't invest it in any way by witnessing and by doing acts of charity, then what little bit we do have will be taken away. We'll lose that too. And we'll be just like the lazy servant. Maybe I'm wrong with that analogy, but that occurred to me today as I thought on the lives of these saints and the words of St. Augustine. And so if that is true, if I'm on to something, then Saints Perpetua and Felicity are still getting a return on their silver. Their witness is still echoing to today. It's still, the ripples of their witness are still coming all the way up to our time, roughly 1800 years later. So this Lent, let us be like the martyrs and give a witness to Christ with our lives by giving up the things that separate us from Christ. Let us give a witness to Christ by dying to ourselves as the martyrs died to the world and living in Christ. Let us try to get a return on the silver given to us in the same way that Saints Perpetua and Felicity did. Next time, we're going to look at the church, or the ecclesiology of the church in the New Testament, I promise. If you like the content, please like and subscribe. And until next time, God bless.